Sadiq Khan is the worst mayor London has ever had. His opposition to stop and search on the grounds that it disproportionately targets black people, which it does, but only because black people in London commit a disproportionate number of violent crimes, has led, of course, to an increase in violent crimes. In fact, under Sadiq Khan's watch, knife crime, gun crime, burglary, car theft, rape, and every other kind of crime has increased dramatically. He has encouraged biased, politicized policing, whereby the Met arrest Christian preachers but not Muslim preachers, break up anti-lockdown protests but not BLM or Extinction Rebellion protests, and go soft on Insulate Britain. He has spent millions of taxpayers' money on virtue signalling, such as the pro-BLM fireworks display on New Year's Eve 2021, in other words, a state-sponsored, taxpayer-funded firework display in support of critical race theory and the destruction of capitalism and the married family. He has given himself the right to stand in judgment over London's history with his very Maoist Commission on Diversity in the Public Realm, which wants to rename streets and tear down statues. He is, in short, a disaster, but all of this will pale in comparison to the disaster awaiting London if he decriminalises Class B drugs there. This is the stupidest, most dangerous idea he's yet come up with. It hinges on the well-worn arguments drug legalisers always trot out. First, they say that punishment/illegality isn't working. Second, that making some drugs legal can ensure that the NHS, not gangsters, can dispense them safely. And third, that marijuana isn't so bad after all, and isn't it about time in this brave new 21st century of ours to legalise it? These are the arguments by which you can always tell when someone doesn't know what they're talking about. But you can bet your life that this proposal will be very popular among the millions of Londoners who smoke dope on a daily basis. The streets of London utterly stink of it. In fact, and in reverse order, marijuana is not harmless. Skunk, the main fare today, is extraordinarily potent. It has been linked with nothing less than an epidemic of psychosis and violent crime. Go to the website Attacker Smoked Cannabis and see how many violent crimes have been committed by people addicted to the stuff. When people say that correlation doesn't equal causation, they neglect to add that it's strongly suggestive of causation, and the evidence is mounting, with experts, counsellors, parents, and scientists ringing the alarm bells. Read what doctors and nurses in Colorado, where cannabis is now legal, have to say. Patients as young as 16, coming in screaming and vomiting and leaving the hospital with semi-permanent psychosis. Lovely. Health experts in Colorado have declared a public health emergency. Is this really a drug we want to legalise when the dangers are so very clear? At this point, the question of alcohol usually comes up. People say, well, alcohol is dangerous and destructive. Why not make that illegal? Followed by a lecture on the failures of prohibition in America. Examine this argument for more than a moment, however, and you'll see that whoever makes it shoots themselves in the foot. Alcohol is indeed dangerous and destructive, not helped by the abolition of many licensing laws under Thatcher. So why add to that danger and destructiveness by legalising another dangerous and destructive drug? The only reason prohibition failed in America and would fail here is because alcohol is thoroughly entrenched in Western culture and has been for thousands of years. It's almost impossible to expunge a cultural artifact as implicated in society as alcohol. If cannabis were legalized, it would likewise be impossible to reverse. Moreover, alcohol may be consumed responsibly in small quantities. The same cannot be said for cannabis, not anymore. That legalizing cannabis would do away with gangsters and the black market and so on is equally stupid. The only way to avoid a black market in cheap, potent drugs would be to make all those drugs free and freely available. Otherwise, you will always have drug dealers outcompeting legal dealers, in this case the state, the NHS, pharmacies, perhaps even doctors' surgeries. Customs officials consistently say that the number one smuggling problem in this country is legal cigarettes, which criminals bring over in vast quantities to sell at below the taxed price. Regulation doesn't solve these problems, it forces them to adapt. There remains the stubborn argument that punishment and illegality isn't working, whatever that means. Anyone who says this disqualifies themselves from the argument altogether, for nothing could be further from the truth. If you want examples of countries that actually do punish drug users, look to Japan and South Korea, where drug-related crime is comparatively non-existent. In fact, the surge in Class B drug use has largely been a result of this. The decriminalisation of cannabis has been the de facto policy of the police and the government since at least the recommendations of the Wooten Report of 1969, which concluded, "For the foreseeable future, our objective is clear, to bring about a situation in which it is extremely unlikely that anyone will go to prison for an offence involving only possession for personal use or for supply on a very limited scale. We recommend that for the next 3 years, the Advisory Committee should keep that objective under review and be ready to propose further measures if the objective is not being realised." James Callaghan, then Home Secretary, rejected the report's proposals, only a year later to introduce legislation that effectively consolidated them. So the idea that criminalisation hasn't worked is, in effect, true. It hasn't been tried. The laws have not been consistently enforced. Most people caught smoking dope nowadays receive an official caution, little more than a slap on the wrist. It wouldn't surprise me if a good number of police officers weren't smoking it themselves. It's doubtful Sadiq Khan knows any of this. Like most drug legalizers, he appears not to have read a single argument against his position. He speaks in ready-made phrases straight from the mouth of the big dope lobby, which is already licking its lips at the vast sums that stand to be made. Indeed, it's ironic that lefty liberal types like Mr. Khan can unwittingly serve the interests of big business when they otherwise spend so much of their time decrying it. He probably thinks that legalizing cannabis, as well I might add as ketamine, is the compassionate, the understanding thing to do. And perhaps a more liberal, compassionate stance is the right one at the individual level. But policy affecting millions is a very different thing and ought not to be decided on the sole basis of a bleeding heart. If he gets his way, all that will happen is that London will sink into even more of a crime-ridden stench than it already is, and there'll be nothing compassionate about it.